Hello everyone. I am the storyteller, and I am here to help you tonight. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep, but before you drift into dreams, do me a small favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments, where are you from, and what time are you watching this. Now, get comfortable. Turn off the lights. Let your thoughts settle. Take a deep breath. Because tonight, we descend into something deeper, something older than sleep. The brass nameplate on my desk still felt foreign beneath my fingertips when the call came through at exactly 2:47 a.m. 3 weeks into my tenure as night manager at the Ocean View Grand, and I was already questioning every decision that had led me here. The hotel stood like a forgotten titan on the edge of the Atlantic, its Art Deco facade weathered, salt-stained, and weary, like an aging starlet refusing to leave the spotlight. For nearly a century, it had endured storms and solitude. But in its bones, there was something, unspoken. Mrs. Chen's voice crackled through the ancient intercom, urgent, yet strangely composed. Main elevator's dead again. We've got 2 guests stuck on the 3rd, trying to get to the honeymoon suite. The backup generator hummed its mechanical lullaby from the basement. Lights remained on. But the main lift sat stubbornly still, its brass doors sealed tight like a secret. I straightened my tie, grabbed the master keys, their weight familiar now after countless midnight misfortunes, and made my way down the deserted hallway. Ocean View Grand didn't attract ordinary tourists. It lured a different kind of soul. Those drawn to nostalgia, to echoes of the past, to something lost in time. The couple stranded tonight were no exception, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson. Elders from Boston. They had specifically requested the honeymoon suite, the very room they had shared 50 years ago on their wedding night. They stood by the inoperable elevator. He leaned on a cane, breath shallow but steady. She clutched a vintage carpetbag that looked older than both of us combined. I offered a polite smile, assured them I'd get them up shortly. Something flickered in Mr. Patterson's eyes, something that told me he had heard such promises before. We turned toward the service elevator. Hidden behind an unmarked door near the kitchen, the service lift was a relic from the 70s. Unlike the main elevator's gleaming Art Deco charm, this one bore no pretense, scarred steel, peeling labels, function over form. I'd used it dozens of times, hauling linens, restocking minibars. Never thought much of it. But tonight, it felt different. The air shifted as we approached. My breath misted. Not from cold, but from something else, something old and damp and unsettling. I pressed the call button. A hum. A delay. Then the doors groaned open. Inside, the same harsh fluorescence. The same worn linoleum floor. The same panel of numbered buttons, 1 through 8. Mrs. Patterson entered first. Her husband followed. I pressed 7. The doors shut with a heavy sigh. The elevator lurched. Began to rise. Floor 1. Floor 2. Floor 3. Then, something shifted. The lights overhead flickered. Once. Twice. Then pulsed in a strange rhythm, shadows dancing across our faces. The digital floor display stuttered. Red numerals twisted. 7 became -7. Then -12. Then strange symbols, geometric shapes I couldn't name. Shapes that hurt to look at. Mr. Patterson squinted, confused. Mrs. Patterson said nothing, just stared at the brass buttons on her coat. I laughed nervously, blamed the old wiring. But my palms were sweating. And the air felt wrong. Not just cold. Wrong. The motion beneath us was no longer vertical. It was skewed. Diagonal. Like we were moving, through a place with different rules. Somewhere we weren't supposed to go. Then came the smell. Rot and salt. Like low tide and rusted copper. When the doors opened, we weren't on the 7th floor. We weren't anywhere on the map. The hallway beyond was swallowed in shadow. Aged tiles lined the walls, their white surface streaked with moisture and something darker. Something that looked like veins. The fluorescent light spilled just far enough to show the beginning of a corridor. It wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't on any blueprint. And yet, it felt like it had always existed. Waiting. I turned to the couple. Mr. Patterson nodded, as if he understood something I didn't. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. Her carpetbag clinked with something heavy. We walked into the dark. Behind us, the elevator doors closed, silently. No motor. No lights. Just a metallic finality. I reached for my radio. No signal. Then I heard it, barely audible, yet unmistakable. Whispers. Coming from the walls. Dripped steadily from somewhere above, the carpet beneath our feet squelched with each step, saturated with brine that left dark footprints in our wake. The smell that had begun as a subtle suggestion now overwhelmed everything else, ancient seaweed, rusted metal, and something deeper and more organic that made my stomach clench. Mrs. Patterson asked about the decor with polite bewilderment, noting how different it looked from the rest of the hotel. Her husband said nothing, but his grip on his cane had tightened until his knuckles showed white beneath the dim lighting. I explained that this must be a service corridor, perhaps used for maintenance access, though I'd never seen it before in all my late-night wanderings through the hotel's hidden spaces. The elevator doors slid shut behind us with unusual finality, leaving us stranded in this impossible space. The call button beside the doors bore no resemblance to any I'd seen before. Instead of the familiar up and down arrows, strange symbols were etched into the brass, symbols that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. We had no choice but to explore. The corridor stretched in both directions, lined with doors that bore no numbers, no names, only more of those shifting symbols that made my eyes water. The sound of our footsteps echoed strangely, as if the walls were hollow or infinitely deep. With each step, the organic smell grew stronger, mixed now with something that reminded me of burning electricity. Then the doors began to move. The first one opened with a soft click as we passed, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Then another. And another. Until the entire corridor became a symphony of opening and closing doors, each one revealing the same impenetrable black void. The sound was rhythmic. Hypnotic. Like breathing, or waves against a distant shore. Mrs. Patterson clutched her husband's arm and mentioned how drafty the corridor had become. Indeed, wind seemed to blow from everywhere and nowhere, carrying with it more of that ancient ocean smell, and something else. Whispers that might have been voices or might have been the building settling around us. I assured them we'd find the main staircase soon, though my confidence was rapidly eroding. The hotel's blueprints, which I had studied obsessively during my first week, showed no sub-basement. No negative floors. Certainly nothing like this maze of weeping tiles and impossible geometry. Yet here we stood. 3 floors below ground level according to the elevator's display. In a space that couldn't exist. The corridor began to curve, subtly at first, then more dramatically, until we were walking in what felt like a slow spiral. The doors continued their rhythmic opening and closing, and I began to notice that the darkness beyond them wasn't empty after all. Shapes moved in those spaces. Indistinct forms that could have been furniture. Or shadows. Or something else entirely. Mr. Patterson's breathing had become labored, and his wife suggested they rest for a moment. We stopped beside one of the perpetually opening doors, and in the brief instant it remained ajar, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The room beyond wasn't empty. It contained what looked like a perfect replica of the honeymoon suite, complete with vintage furniture and ocean view windows. But the view through those windows showed not the familiar Atlantic coastline, but something else entirely. A dark sea beneath a starless sky. Where shapes that might have been ships, or might have been something else, moved with purpose through waters that seemed to flow upward. The door clicked shut before I could process what I'd seen, leaving me to wonder if my eyes had played tricks in the unstable lighting. Mrs. Patterson asked if I was feeling well, noting that I'd gone quite pale. I blamed the poor air circulation and suggested we continue moving. The curved corridor eventually straightened, leading to what appeared to be a service area lined with utility pipes and electrical conduits. The walls here were different. Older, somehow. Made of stones that glistened with moisture and bore marks that could have been carved decorations, or could have been something else entirely. The whispers I'd noticed earlier had grown more distinct, though I still couldn't make out individual words. That's when I saw the staircase. It rose from the stone floor like something from a fever dream, its steps carved from the same glistening rock as the walls. Unlike the utilitarian concrete stairs found elsewhere in the hotel, these seemed ancient, worn smooth by countless feet over decades or centuries. Seaweed clung to the banister, fresh and dripping, as if the tide had just receded. Mrs. Patterson expressed relief at finding a way up, though her husband seemed hesitant to approach the strange staircase. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, and I realized they were coming from above, from whatever lay at the top of those impossible steps. As we climbed, the temperature continued to drop, and our breath came in invisible puffs that dispersed slowly in the still air. The walls pressed closer with each step, and I noticed that the stone was carved with more of those shifting symbols, now accompanied by figures that looked almost human, but somehow wrong in proportions and posture. The staircase seemed to go on forever, spiraling upward through stone and shadow, past floors that couldn't exist in any rational building plan. Each landing revealed more corridors branching off into darkness, more doors opening and closing in their eternal rhythm, more whispers growing louder and more urgent. Finally, after what felt like hours but could have been minutes, we reached a door marked with familiar numbers, 7. The brass plaque gleamed in the uncertain light, and beyond it lay what appeared to be the hotel's normal 7th-floor corridor, complete with burgundy carpet and warm lighting. I opened the door with trembling hands, and we stepped into the familiar space of the Ocean View Grand's top floor. The Patterson suite lay at the end of the hall, its door bearing the same brass number it had always worn. The elderly couple thanked me profusely for my help, though Mrs. Patterson mentioned how strange the service areas had seemed and hoped the hotel would address the moisture problem soon. I escorted them to their room, ensured they had everything they needed, and returned to the staircase door through which we'd emerged. But when I turned the handle, it opened onto a simple utility closet, filled with cleaning supplies and spare linens. No stone steps. No ancient walls. No whispers in the darkness. The service elevator, when I finally found it again, operated perfectly. The button panel showed only floors 1 through 8, and the digital display functioned normally. I rode it down to the lobby, my hands still shaking, my mind racing to process what we'd experienced. Back at my desk, I pulled out the hotel's original blueprints, documents dating back to the 1920s that showed every floor, every room, every corridor. There was no basement level marked as -1. There never had been. But when I checked the guest registry for the Patterson's reservation, I found something that made my blood run cold. Their names appeared in the ledger, along with their room number and arrival date. But in the margin, written in faded ink that looked decades old, was a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. Returned from 1. No questions asked. The timestamp on the note was from tonight. Written in my own hand. Though I had no memory of making it. I sit here now as dawn breaks over the Atlantic, the hotel stirring to life around me. In a few hours, I'll turn over my duties to the morning manager and try to forget what happened in those impossible corridors beneath the hotel. But I know I won't succeed. Because sometimes, late at night, when the building settles around me, I hear them again, the whispers from below, calling my name, promising answers to questions I'm afraid to ask. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the service elevator, the buttons show more than 8 floors. Sometimes, they show -1. The brass nameplate on my desk has been joined by something else, a key I don't remember receiving, made of the same glistening stone as those impossible stairs. It bears no number, no room designation. Only those shifting symbols that hurt to look at directly. I tell myself I'll throw it away. That I'll request a transfer to another hotel, another city, another life. A life where elevators only go where they're supposed to go. And basement levels that don't exist, stay properly non-existent. But I know I won't. Because every night, as the clock strikes 2:47 a.m., I still listen. I find myself reaching for that stone key, wondering what doors it might open, what corridors it might reveal, what truths about the Ocean View Grand wait in the spaces between floors. And sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, I think I already know the answer. The hotel has been calling people down to that impossible level for decades, maybe centuries. Guests who ask too many questions. Staff who notice too much. Travelers who stumble into spaces they were never meant to find. They all receive the same invitation. The same impossible journey through corridors that taste of salt and time. Most return, memory clouded with only vague recollections of strange service areas and moisture problems. But some don't return at all. Leaving only names in old ledgers and rooms that grow colder with each passing year. I check the registry one more time, running my finger down the list of current guests. So many names. So many room numbers. So many arrival dates, stretching back further than any hotel should reasonably maintain records. And in the margins, more notes. In various hands, all describing the same thing. Return from -1. Questions unasked. Memories conveniently blurred. The sun rises higher, painting the Atlantic in shades of gold and crimson. And I realize, with growing certainty, that I'll never leave the Ocean View Grand. Not really. Because the hotel has been collecting people like me for generations. Those who see too much. Who question too deeply. Who stumble into spaces that exist in the margins of reality. We become part of its staff. Permanent residents of the impossible floors. Guides for future guests who find themselves in elevators that go places they shouldn't. I look at my reflection in the dark computer screen and notice that my nameplate has changed. Where it once read, Manager, it now simply says, Concierge, Level 1. Tomorrow night, when the main elevator breaks down again and confused guests need assistance reaching their rooms, I'll be ready. I'll guide them to the service elevator, press the button for their floor, and wait to see where we end up. After all, the Ocean View Grand has always prided itself on customer service, even in the spaces that don't exist. Story 2, The Rest Stop. The interstate stretched ahead like a black tongue under the storm clouds, and I knew I wasn't going to make it to Phoenix. My eyelids felt like sandpaper, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel from too much coffee and too little sleep. The dashboard clock glowed 11:47 p.m. as I spotted the blue highway sign. Texaco, next exit. Thank God. I pulled into the empty lot, gravel crunching under my tires. The gas station squatted in the darkness like a forgotten tomb. Its neon signs were dead. Windows black. A handwritten sign hung crooked on the door. Closed for renovations. Perfect. At least the lot was lit by a single buzzing street lamp that cast everything in sickly yellow light. I maneuvered my white cargo van to the far corner, away from the road, and killed the engine. The sudden silence was overwhelming after 12 hours of highway noise. My cargo area was packed tight with sample cases, medical supplies I was hauling to distributors across the Southwest, glucose monitors, blood pressure cuffs, insulin pumps. The kind of gear that kept people alive. Ironically, while I felt like I was dying from exhaustion. The vinyl seat creaked as I climbed into the back, shoving aside a box of surgical tubing to clear a space. I'd done this before, sleeping in the van when motels were too expensive or too far. The metal walls felt close in the darkness, but it beat nodding off at 70 miles per hour. I was reaching for my travel pillow when the silence became unbearable. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring and your thoughts too loud. I fumbled for the radio, spinning the dial through static until I found something, anything, to fill the void. Static. More static. A distant country station fading in and out. Then, clearly, I caught a signal. Whispers. Not conversation. Whispers. Soft. Deliberate. Barely audible. I turned up the volume, straining to make out words. But they seemed backward. Like a recording played in reverse. The hissing consonants and stretched vowels made my skin crawl. But it was better than the oppressive silence. I was settling back against my makeshift pillow when the words became clear. Medical kit. Rectangular. Black. Plastic latches. Second row from the door. My blood went cold. As I stood there, staring at the distorted reflection in the hallway mirror, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't look away, couldn't move. My mind screamed that I was imagining things, but every instinct told me something was terribly wrong. The reflection had stopped mimicking me. The figure in the mirror, tall and formless, remained still, its outline barely discernible in the dim light. It was as though it was waiting for me to make the next move. I stepped forward, but the reflection didn't follow. My breath caught as I realized it wasn't mimicking me anymore at all. The shadow remained still, but its presence was suffocating, drawing all the light from the hallway, making the space around me feel narrower, darker. My heart pounded as I tried to step away, but my feet felt heavy, as if they were glued to the floor. The shadows stretched unnaturally, curling toward me like tendrils seeking to pull me into the glass. Then, in the silence of that hall, a voice echoed, low and almost drowned out by the hum of the flickering light above. "You shouldn't have opened the door," it whispered. The words seemed to come from both inside the mirror and from behind me, their source impossible to pinpoint. I whipped around, but the hallway was empty. The only thing behind me was the heavy silence, thick with anticipation. The door to room 237 was closed now, impossibly closed. I knew, beyond reason, that I hadn't closed it. But there it was, just as solid as before. The key I had found on the floor was still clenched in my hand, though I hadn't remembered picking it up. I turned back to the mirror. The shadow had moved closer, its shape becoming clearer. It had no face, but the absence of one seemed to speak louder than any features could. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, moving in a way that defied human form. I reached for the door handle of room 237, every step drawing me closer to the figure's silent, watching presence. The mirror seemed to pulse now, the shadows swelling and shrinking like a heartbeat. The air grew colder, and I could feel a cold pressure building in the room, squeezing in from every side. My fingers grazed the handle. Then, a sharp tug at my ankle. A pull that wasn't there, but still somehow it was, like fingers, invisible and cold, yanking me backward, toward the reflection. I stumbled, the shadows around me thickening, warping, as if the very room were dissolving into something else, something that shouldn't exist. The mirror was no longer reflecting the hallway, but a black void, filled with whispers. Desperate, I turned the key and pushed the door open, hoping to escape the nightmare that was closing in. But instead of stepping into the room, I stepped into darkness, a vast, empty space. The door slammed behind me. I was no longer in the hotel. As the door slammed shut behind me, the familiar world of the hotel dissolved. The air became thick, suffocating, as if I had walked into a place that defied all laws of space and time. The instant I crossed the threshold, the oppressive atmosphere of room 237 enveloped me, but it wasn't the room I had stepped into, it was something else entirely. The space stretched endlessly, filled with a disorienting, tangled web of dark corridors and open doors. The walls were alive with movement, like the pulse of a living thing, and the floor beneath my feet felt soft and unstable, as if it were made of something far too organic to be concrete or wood. The air was cold and moist, thick with the scent of decay and something sharper, more pungent, blood, perhaps, or something even worse. I took a step forward, but it felt as though the ground was shifting beneath me. My foot didn't land where I expected. I stumbled, caught off balance, and fell hard onto the cold, uneven surface. The darkness around me seemed to close in, thick and black, with no discernible boundaries. No matter how hard I tried to stand, the ground seemed to tilt under me, and I was caught in a slow, nauseating swirl of vertigo. I braced myself against a wall, trying to focus, trying to ground myself in something real. But the longer I stayed in this place, the more it seemed to twist and distort. There was no logic to it, no sense to the way the corridors bent and stretched in ways that were impossible to understand. Then, I heard it. A voice, familiar, yet utterly alien. It whispered from somewhere in the deep, dark expanse. The words were unintelligible at first, garbled, like a radio broadcast coming through in fragmented bursts. But then, it grew clearer. The whisper, now sharp and deliberate, seemed to crawl into my ears, wrapping itself around my thoughts, until I couldn't tell if I was hearing it or if it was being planted directly in my mind. You shouldn't have come. The voice was mine. The same cadence, the same inflection, but colder. Distant. Like a version of myself that had already been here, already lost to whatever this place was. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, but there was no taste. No moisture. Only that thick, overpowering smell that made me want to choke. The air was suffocating, and I could feel it pressing against my skin, crawling beneath it. I turned to look behind me. The hallway stretched into oblivion. The door I had entered from was now gone, swallowed by the darkness, as if it had never been there at all. The space I was in seemed to ripple, like the surface of water disturbed by an unseen hand. I felt disoriented, like I had walked into the very fabric of a nightmare that existed beyond the hotel, beyond any world I understood. They all come here, the voice said again, those who seek answers. Those who question too much. They're all here, waiting. Waiting for the one who will carry the load. I wanted to scream, to call out, but the words were trapped in my throat, suffocating, tangled in the overwhelming sense of dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. It was as though this place had no voice, no shape, no substance, yet it was calling to me, pulling me deeper into its embrace. I took a step forward, and the ground shifted again beneath me, the walls twisting like they were alive. The shadowy corridors stretched endlessly before me, each door a mirror to some unimaginable thing. There were no windows here, no sense of direction, only an eternal, oppressive darkness that seemed to press against my soul. You will stay, the voice whispered, softer now, as if the very air was drawing closer, wrapping around me. You will never leave. I didn't want to move. My feet felt glued to the floor, my body frozen in terror. And yet, the pull to walk deeper into the maze was irresistible, as if the very darkness were drawing me towards something I had to understand, something I couldn't escape. With each step, the air grew heavier, colder. The smell intensified, mingling with the distinct odor of old wood, stale air, and something decayed. The walls seemed to close in tighter, as if they were watching, waiting, listening. The whispers came again, faster this time, more frantic, more insistent. You are not alone. You never were. I turned, heart racing, eyes scanning the shadows. But there was no one there. No figure. No shape. No face. Yet, somehow, I felt their presence, something just beyond my reach. Something watching from the endless blackness that seemed to stretch on forever. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way. I fell. Into a place darker than darkness, a void that seemed to have no bottom. I was weightless, caught in the grip of the endless expanse. And as I fell, the whispers grew louder, echoing all around me, twisting and warping in a maddening cacophony. I tried to scream, but my mouth was filled with the oppressive silence of this place, this hotel that should never have existed. I was falling forever. And I knew, with a horrible certainty, that I would never reach the ground. The descent seemed endless, stretching through the thick, suffocating darkness that wrapped around me like 1,000 cold hands. Every second felt like an eternity, as if the void had no end, and I would fall forever, trapped in this inescapable nightmare. I tried to scream again, but no sound left my throat. My body felt weightless, suspended in this terrifying abyss, but at the same time, I could feel the pressure building around me, squeezing me from all sides, as though the very space itself was trying to crush me. The whispers, those haunting, foreign voices, grew louder, swirling around me like a storm. They spoke in 1,000 languages, all blending into one incoherent, maddening hum that threatened to drive me insane. "You are part of it now," one whisper breathed, its tone cold and detached. "You are one with the hotel. One with the shadows." I tried to pull myself together, to summon any sense of control, but the darkness was too powerful, too overwhelming. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was as if the darkness itself had a life, a consciousness, and it was feeding on my fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. It wrapped itself around my mind, tightening its grip, making it harder and harder to think clearly. Suddenly, my body lurched forward, and the fall stopped. I was no longer weightless. I stumbled, feeling the rough ground beneath my palms as I tried to regain my balance. But when I looked around, there was no ground. No walls. No light. Just more of the same consuming void that surrounded me, but somehow now, it felt different. I was no longer falling. I was standing, no, floating, in a space where up and down had no meaning. I could feel my legs trembling beneath me, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no solid earth to ground me, only endless space and a suffocating silence. The whispers stopped. For a brief moment, there was nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing, ragged and uneven. It was as if the very world around me had taken a breath, waiting. Waiting for something. Then, in the distance, I saw it. A light. Dim at first, flickering like a candle in the wind. It was small, almost insignificant, but it drew me in, like a moth to a flame. The darkness around me seemed to part, pushing away as the light grew brighter, more tangible. With each step, the shadows shrank back, unwilling to follow, retreating as if afraid of what the light might reveal. I moved toward it, instinctively. The darkness seemed to press against me from every angle, but the light was everything. It was safety. It was hope. But as I neared it, the air around me began to change. The temperature dropped, sharply, until it felt like I was walking through freezing air. The whispers returned, louder now, louder than before, though still distant. They seemed to come from the light itself, now distorted and guttural, as though something inside the light was struggling to break free. "You should not have come," the voice moaned, distorted and deep. "You are not welcome here." But I couldn't stop myself. I was drawn to it, pulled toward it by something I couldn't understand, a force beyond my control. The light grew blinding now, its intensity pushing the darkness further away. But with the light came something else, something darker, something I couldn't see but could feel. A presence. And then, as if the very air around me had cracked open, I heard it. A door. It wasn't visible, not in any physical sense, but it was there. I could feel it, its weight, its presence, pressing down on me. A door opening into a place that was not meant to be seen. "You will stay here. You cannot leave," the voice whispered again, louder now, shaking the very fabric of this place. "This is your new home." And in that moment, I knew. I was not in control anymore. I had never been in control. The hotel, the Ocean View Grand, had been calling to me. Not just in this moment, but since I first stepped foot inside. It had waited. Watched. It had chosen me, just like it had chosen so many others. "You are part of us now," the voice murmured again, this time gentle, coaxing. "Welcome to your new life." The door in front of me opened fully, revealing a space that was neither here nor there. It was a place of shadows and light, of forgotten memories and twisted dreams. It was where the lost things went, where those who asked too many questions found their answers, whether they wanted them or not. I took one last step forward, crossing the threshold, and the darkness swallowed me whole. The murmuring voices were not offering reassurances, they were guiding me. Guiding me toward an understanding I wasn't ready to accept. The room, the entire building, was not simply adjusting to pressure changes or responding to natural forces. It was alive. The hotel was alive, a vast organism whose breath and rhythms flowed through the walls, the floors, the air. It wasn't just my family being pulled into the rhythm, the entire room, the entire hotel, was part of something far larger, something inescapable. The murmuring voices, once fragmented and indistinct, now coalesced into a coherent message. It was an invitation, a beckoning, to become part of the whole. I realized with growing dread that this was not a malfunction. This was not the building responding to some environmental factor. This was purposeful. The hotel was seeking to integrate us, to merge us with its machinery. The synchronized breathing, the unconscious mimicry of the structure's movements, was a process, a ritual, of merging our bodies with the heartbeat of the building. The ceiling was not just a ceiling anymore. It was the lungs of the hotel. The wall, the floors, even the light fixtures were part of a vast, living system designed to maintain equilibrium. We were being assimilated, absorbed into the living framework of the hotel itself. Our lives, our breaths, were not our own any longer, they were part of the larger, mechanical rhythm of this monstrous entity. The floor beneath me felt softer now, like it was breathing, too, its pulses seeping into my legs. I could feel the weight of the air pressing in on me, making each breath more labored, like I was breathing through water. The temperature in the room continued to drop, but my body felt strangely heated, my pulse quickening as my chest expanded and contracted in time with the building. I knew, with a sinking certainty, that if I allowed myself to completely synchronize, would lose my individuality forever. I would be absorbed into the collective, lost to whatever strange force was pulling at the fabric of this place. There would be no escape. No return. It's not too late, the voices whispered, sweet and patient. You are already part of us. Let go. Let the rhythm take you. I wanted to resist. I had to resist. But the pull was overwhelming, the sense of belonging, of surrender, was intoxicating. Every muscle in my body screamed for release, for peace. My lungs burned with the effort to hold my breath. The air was thick with the rhythm of the hotel, pressing against me like a wave, urging me to let go. The whispers were getting louder, more insistent, now accompanied by soft, rhythmic noises, like breathing, like the pulse of a heart. It was almost a physical sensation now, the hotel's heartbeat resonating within my chest. The ground beneath me trembled in time with the rhythm, and for a moment, I thought I felt something, someone, move beside me, brushing against my leg. But there was no one. There couldn't be. The hotel is alive. The thought echoed in my mind, growing clearer, sharper. Alive. With an almost primal need to escape, I bolted for the door. I grabbed the handle, but before I could open it, the weight of the air, of the hotel, pressed down harder. The walls around me seemed to breathe, shifting and contracting, blocking my path. I yanked at the door again, this time with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. I turned back to Sarah and the baby. They were still lying in bed, their chests rising and falling in that strange, synchronized rhythm. But something had changed. I could see their eyes now, closed and unfocused, their pupils dilated, as though they were not fully in this world anymore. The connection between them and the hotel had deepened, their breath no longer their own, but part of the living, pulsing mass of the building. I thought I could see something moving beneath their skin, like something alive, slithering just beneath the surface. But it was too late. I knew it was too late. The murmuring voices swelled, now all speaking in unison, filling the room with an overwhelming presence. The air was thick with their words, and they were calling me, inviting me to join them, to let go and become part of the hotel's eternal cycle. As I stood there, paralyzed, the ceiling's rhythm grew more frantic. The breathing was no longer calm. It was urgent. It was as if the building itself was panicking, struggling to maintain its control over us. Then, with a final, horrible realization, I understood. The hotel was not offering us life, it was taking it. It was feeding off of us. The synchronized breathing, the connection, was a process of consumption. The more we aligned with the hotel's rhythm, the more of us it absorbed. Our lungs, our hearts, our very essence, were being drawn into the building's machinery. And once we were part of it, fully part of it, there would be no returning. We would become its permanent residents. Another cog in the machine. The voices called to me one final time, urging me to let go. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I felt my body shudder in time with the beating heart of the hotel. My chest tightened as if I was being slowly suffocated, but it didn't hurt. It wasn't pain. It was peaceful. The darkness began to claim my vision, and I took a deep breath, in time with the rhythm of the hotel. And that was the last thing I remember. Clear water, but an oily, viscous substance that clung to the glass like something organic. The drops shimmered in the flashlight's beam, their surface thick and almost black, reflecting the light back at us in unnatural angles. As I stepped closer to get a better look, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "That's not water," I muttered, more to myself than to Miguel. He leaned in, eyes narrowing in the dim light. "What the hell is it?" I didn't have an answer. But something about the way the liquid clung to the frame, slow and deliberate, made me uneasy. I backed away from the window, instinctively reaching for the door to leave. But something stopped me, a pressure in the room, a sensation that wasn't quite physical but was as overwhelming as the heat that radiated from a body standing too close. Miguel turned to leave, but as he did, the mirror behind us flickered again. This time, I saw something. A figure. For just a fraction of a second, it was there, standing just behind us, impossibly tall, its shape distorting the light as if it was something caught halfway between two worlds. Then it was gone. I stumbled back, my heart racing. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice a tremor. Miguel was already half turned, shining his light over the bathroom again. "See what?" I didn't have the words for it, not yet. The air in the room had thickened. I could feel it pressing in on me, the walls seeming to grow smaller, the shadows growing longer. The silence was unbearable now, louder than the sound of the faucet, louder than the dripping liquid in the window. It felt alive, like something was watching, listening, waiting. Suddenly, a thud came from inside the walls, a sound too heavy to be the building settling. It was a muffled crash, followed by a dragging noise. And then, the water started running again. But this time, it wasn't from the faucet. The walls were sweating. I looked around the bathroom, eyes wild, trying to make sense of what was happening. The ceiling, the floor, the corners of the room, all seemed to be weeping. The walls were weeping. Water, thick and black, dripping from the corners, pooling in strange, silent puddles on the floor. "It's not just the water," I said hoarsely, my throat closing in panic. "The building's bleeding." Miguel's flashlight flickered as he stepped back. His face was pale, his eyes wide with confusion. "What the hell is going on here?" Before I could respond, something shifted. The air tightened, compressed in a way that felt like the walls were drawing inward. Then, the temperature plummeted. The darkness seemed to deepen, and the water in the room pooled in an unnatural way, twisting into shapes. For a moment, I thought I saw faces, distorted faces, moving within the liquid. The whispering started again. But this time, it wasn't just faint murmurs. It was a chorus of voices, all around us, low and guttural. Their words were thick, like they were emerging from the very walls themselves. The bathroom light flickered out, leaving us in darkness. I spun around, heart racing, but Miguel had already reached for the door. The hallway beyond was silent, but the stench of decay was thick in the air now. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and I had no idea how to stop it. When Miguel yanked open the door, the hallway didn't look right. It was wrong. The colors of the carpet seemed to twist in strange patterns, the walls stretched beyond their dimensions, and the hallway itself felt as if it was expanding. The floor beneath us groaned, and I could hear a distant echo of something large, moving, something alive, far beneath the hotel. The feeling in my chest was undeniable now. The building wasn't just creaking and groaning under age and weather, it was alive. And it was hungry. We backed into the bathroom, the doors slamming behind us with a deafening bang. The mirror flickered again, and I saw it. The figure. Taller now. Its face twisted in agony as it pressed against the glass, its features distorted by the darkness behind it. It was reaching for us, its hand emerging from the depths of the mirror, twisting through the surface as if the glass were made of liquid. Miguel screamed, a sound that was swallowed by the deep, rasping breath of the building around us. He lunged for the door, but the lock clicked shut behind him with a finality that made my stomach drop. The walls seemed to move, the space around us shifting, like the room itself was swallowing us whole. And then the voices grew louder. "Help us," they whispered, low and mournful, thick with despair. "Help us breathe." I could feel the air growing heavier, thicker, the walls pressing in, constricting my chest, like something was drawing the very breath from my lungs. The figure in the mirror writhed, its face merging with the glass, its fingers elongating as it reached for us. The whispers were everywhere now, their message clear and unmistakable. "You are here, and you are part of us." Shapes of the furniture and the soft, undisturbed sheets that marked where Marcus slept. I turned back to the mirror, my breath catching in my throat. The man was still there, standing between the beds as if he had been there all along, just waiting for me to notice. The shadows that veiled his face shifted slightly, as though they were alive, breathing with him. For a moment, I thought I was still asleep, caught in some half-dream state, but the sharp clarity of the room, the cold touch of the sheets, the hum of the city outside, told me otherwise. I was wide awake, and something was in the reflection, something that shouldn't be there. I held my breath, unsure if I wanted to confirm what I was seeing or deny it. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was as though it was waiting for me to make the first move. I glanced over at Marcus, hoping to wake him, but he was still, blissfully unaware of the cold presence that loomed over the room. The clock beside my bed read 3:34 a.m. Another minute had passed, but I didn't know if time had actually moved or if I had simply become locked in the stillness of the moment. My fingers tightened on the edge of the blanket, and the air in the room felt heavier, like the figure in the mirror was pulling the atmosphere toward him. My thoughts raced as I tried to make sense of it. Was I seeing something that wasn't there? Was it a trick of the light, or something in my mind? But the sensation in my gut told me this was real. I couldn't take my eyes off the reflection. The man in the mirror, he seemed to be leaning forward ever so slightly, as though he were trying to speak, though no sound came from him. And then, it happened. The figure raised its hand slowly, its fingers twitching as if testing the air, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. It was mimicking me. My own hand moved of its own accord, reaching out toward the reflection. It was as though some invisible force was pulling me toward it, toward the figure in the mirror. I pulled my hand back, shaking my head. This isn't real, I thought. This can't be happening. But the reflection didn't follow. The man in the mirror stayed where he was, just a step closer, his face still obscured by shadows. The room seemed to hum with an energy I couldn't understand. I glanced back at Marcus, still sound asleep, his face serene and calm, but something deep inside me told me that this was no ordinary dream, no ordinary night. The figure wasn't just standing there. It was waiting. I shifted in the bed, unable to tear my gaze away from the mirror. The longer I stared at the figure, the more I realized he wasn't just standing there. The air around him was changing, subtly, but undeniably. The shadows that obscured his face were starting to move, like liquid shadows that pooled around his features, deepening the void where his eyes should be. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. My instincts screamed at me to get out of the room, to run as far away as I could from whatever this thing was. But I couldn't. I was frozen, locked in place, watching the reflection grow more and more vivid. The figure took a step forward, his movements fluid but slow. And then, something impossible happened. He stepped out of the mirror. The world seemed to snap in that instant, like the space around me folded in on itself. I blinked hard, hoping to make sense of what I had just seen, but when my eyes opened again, he was standing beside my bed. It wasn't a reflection anymore. I could feel his presence, colder than the air, a cold that wrapped around me like a shroud. His face remained hidden in shadow, but I could hear his breathing now, slow, measured, as if he were savoring the moment. My body tensed, instinctively pulling away, but there was nowhere to go. The room felt smaller, suffocatingly so, and as I tried to scream, my throat closed. No sound would escape. And then, in that paralyzing silence, I heard him speak. Not with words, but with a thought, an echo in my mind. "You've been waiting for me, just like I've been waiting for you." The words wrapped themselves around my consciousness, tightening, constricting, until I couldn't breathe at all. The figure leaned closer, and I could feel the chill of his presence spreading throughout the room, suffocating the air. I was no longer sure if this was a dream, a hallucination, or something else entirely. His shape grew clearer now, the outline of a suit, the faintest hint of a face beneath the shadows, but the more I stared, the more it seemed like the space around him bent and twisted, as if reality itself were unraveling. "You wanted something more," he whispered, his voice impossibly deep, impossibly close. "But now, you've found me. And now, I belong to you, just as you belong to me." The room was closing in. The walls felt as if they were pushing toward me, the air becoming thick with tension. The floor beneath me shifted, and I realized I was sinking into the bed, deeper and deeper, as if the mattress itself were swallowing me whole. With a final, aching breath, I shut my eyes, unable to look at the figure anymore, unable to face whatever this was. But even as I closed them, I could still feel him there, his presence lingering in the space where he had been. And then, there was only darkness. The reflected Marcus's hand pressed flat against the mirror, palm out, fingers splayed wide as if inviting me to touch the surface. The coldness radiated from the glass, seeping into my own skin, but it wasn't just the temperature that made me freeze. The pressure in the room was building, thick and heavy, pushing against my chest as if I were underwater. Every instinct screamed at me to turn away, to look anywhere but at the mirror, but I couldn't. It was like the reflection held me in place, drawing me closer with its silent, insistent pull. The real Marcus continued to ask me questions, his voice distant and muffled, his brow furrowed in confusion. I could barely make out his words, as if they were being filtered through layers of something thick and oppressive. My own breathing had become shallow, laborious, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of what was happening. I forced my eyes back to the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. The reflected Marcus's hand remained against the glass, his fingers pressing harder, as if trying to push through, to reach me. I could feel the glass vibrate under the pressure, a low hum that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the building, like the very structure itself was resonating with some kind of ancient, unfamiliar force. And then, as if the reflection had sensed my hesitation, it shifted. The hand on the glass moved, not with the slow deliberation it had shown before, but fast, too fast, like it had been waiting for something. The fingers curled, scratching against the surface of the mirror, dragging a sound that made my teeth ache. I wanted to look away, to shut my eyes, but my gaze remained fixed on that impossible figure standing in the reflection, its eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that was suffocating. The smile grew wider, stretching inhumanly across the face of the reflected Marcus. And then, slowly, it spoke. Its lips moved, but the words were silent, a whisper of soundless speech that I felt in my bones. It wasn't just communication, it was instruction. A silent command, urging me to do something, urging me to step closer. I shook my head, trying to break free from the grip it had on me, but my body refused to respond. My limbs were locked in place, heavy as though they had been filled with cement. The room seemed to blur at the edges, as though reality itself was bending, folding around us, and all the while, the reflection grew more real, more present, more solid in its existence. Time continued to flicker backward, 33302, 33301, 33,300, and with every passing second, I could feel the moment drawing nearer, the moment when the reflection would no longer just be a reflection, when the boundary would collapse entirely. A realization flashed through my mind with terrifying clarity: the figure in the mirror wasn't just a mirror version of Marcus, it was something else entirely, something that had been waiting for this moment. Suddenly, the reflection's smile shifted, morphing from something unsettlingly smug to something darker, predatory. The figure's eyes narrowed, and I felt a cold whisper sweep through the room, a presence, something behind me, something moving. A faint shadow, slipping from the corners of my vision, from the edges of the mirror, as if the reflection itself had begun to bleed out into the physical world. I opened my mouth to scream, to shout for Marcus, but no sound emerged. The pressure in my chest grew unbearable, and my vision swam, the edges of the room turning black as my lungs constricted. I needed to move, needed to break free from the mirror's hold, but my body felt like stone. The reflected Marcus took another step forward, his hand still pressed against the glass. And then, as if the entire room were holding its breath, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The reflected Marcus's fingers began to wiggle against the glass, flexing as if it were reaching for something, someone. I tried to stand, to move, but my body wouldn't obey. I was trapped in the moment, caught between the ticking backward clock and the figure in the mirror who wasn't just a reflection anymore. The mirror had become a doorway, and the figure beyond was now reaching for me. I could feel its presence closing in, that knowing smile stretching wider as the reflection began to dissolve the boundary between worlds, the air around me growing thick, heavy with the promise of something terrible. The reflection reached for the glass one final time, and then, with a sickening lurch, its hand pressed through. The mirror rippled like water, and a cold rush of air washed over me as if the space behind it had been opened, like a door to another reality. I could feel the strange force, the pull of the other world, dragging me toward the mirror, drawing me in. The reflection was no longer contained. It had stepped through. I felt something cold and smooth wrap around my wrist, fingers. Fingers that weren't mine, fingers that didn't belong to Marcus, fingers that didn't belong to anyone in this world. And with that touch, the world around me shattered. The glass cracked, splintered like ice, and I was pulled, unwillingly, through the mirror. A process, a procedure being carried out in the very space I stood in, as if I were a participant in something far larger than myself. The word seemed to imply a transformation or a system designed to adjust me, to integrate my presence into some kind of controlled environment, but the specifics remained elusive. Memory integration, environmental conditioning, what was I supposed to be becoming? And why was I receiving these cryptic updates in such an eerie, unspoken way? The snowflakes on the ground continued their strange dance, their letters shifting and evolving, constantly updating in a language I couldn't fully grasp. I felt the weight of them, though, pressing against my chest, suffocating me with their meaning, something dark and unknown. My skin tingled with the icy cold that had taken over the corridor, and I suddenly realized that my breath had become shallow, like I was suffocating not from the heat of the abandoned fort, but from something much more insidious, a creeping sense of being watched, as if the building itself were attuned to me, as if something within these walls knew exactly who I was. The footsteps kept coming, growing louder, multiplying until the sound was no longer just in front of me. It was coming from everywhere. The metallic clank of boots on the floor was no longer a single, precise rhythm. It was a choir, disjointed, overlapping, like 1,000 ghosts walking side by side in perfect synchronization. My stomach twisted with a growing unease, my sense of space distorting further as the corridor around me stretched outward, becoming impossibly vast. The air felt thick, oppressive, as though the weight of the building had pressed down on me, changing the very molecules I breathed. I turned back to the ice machine, desperate for something solid, something real. The message on the digital panel had changed. Now, It read. Subject, final integration complete. Progress, 100%. And below that, a new message appeared, typed in the same cold, efficient text. Welcome to your new reality. Initiating transfer sequence. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. Transfer sequence. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew the implications were terrifying. Suddenly, a sharp, mechanical click cut through the air, and a light above the ice machine flickered on. The hum grew louder, the vibrations beneath my feet more pronounced, like the building was coming to life in a way that didn't belong to the world I knew. The footsteps grew louder, closer. They were not just footsteps now, they were footsteps with purpose, and each one echoed in my mind as if they were moving through my own thoughts. A whisper tugged at the edges of my consciousness, beckoning me forward into a space that I had no desire to enter. I turned to face the wall, desperate to block out the strange noises, but it was as if the walls themselves were breathing. The surface undulated like water, the cracks in the concrete expanding and contracting with an unnatural rhythm. There was a faint glow behind the concrete, like a heartbeat pulsing within the walls. I could feel it, a strange, unholy connection to whatever force was pushing at the limits of this place. Then, in the midst of this growing chaos, the progress bar on the digital panel flickered again, and the message on the screen began to expand. Transfer sequence initiated. Subject 213 confirmed. Connection stabilizing. Before I could comprehend what was happening, the temperature in the corridor plummeted further, and a strange, crystalline pattern began to form across the walls, as if they were growing cold fingers, stretching and reaching for something, or someone, inside the walls. I could feel the strange pull of the building's energy growing stronger, tugging at me, urging me to step forward. But the real horror hit when I glanced to my right. The footsteps had stopped. A single shadow stretched across the length of the corridor, cutting through the darkness. It wasn't a shadow that belonged to a person, it was too long, too stretched, as though it had been cast from something impossibly tall and thin. It moved with a deliberate slowness, like a predator stalking its prey. The snowflakes continued to scatter, reappearing in new patterns, but now the letters formed my name. Subject, Zane Dorr. I was the subject. I was the one being integrated, the one undergoing the transfer. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Before I could react, the shadow in the corridor moved, shifting impossibly fast, stretching toward me like an arm reaching through the fabric of space itself. I stumbled backward, my legs catching on the plastic bucket I had dropped earlier, but before I could gain my balance, the shadow reached me, its form solidifying into a human shape, a figure so tall, so thin that it seemed to distort the space around it. Its face was unfathomably hollow, a black void where features should have been, and yet I could feel its gaze on me, pulling me toward it. The figure moved closer, its presence growing, its long, skeletal arms stretching out. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't open. My body was frozen, rooted to the spot by the weight of its gaze and the unnatural force pulling me forward. Every step it took reverberated through my bones, shaking the ground beneath my feet. I looked desperately back at the machine, where the snowflakes continued to spell out one final message before they faded entirely. Transfer complete. New reality engaged. As the figure reached out and touched me, the world around me fractured, a violent splitting, like glass breaking under pressure. And then, just as abruptly as it began, everything went still. The footsteps ceased. The temperature returned to normal. The walls were solid again, unmarked by the cracks and fissures. The ice machine was silent, still, the progress bar frozen at 100%. I was standing in a completely different corridor, one I didn't recognize. The walls were smooth, newly painted, and the air felt too clean, too perfect. It was only then that I realized, I was no longer in Fort Meridian. I had been transferred. The cold creeping up my spine intensified as I read the words. Artificial memory. Pathway reconstruction. Was this the process I was undergoing? It felt like a nightmare, a descent into an uncharted mind, one that had been tampered with far beyond what I could comprehend. My surroundings continued to shift, as if the walls, the floor, and even the very air were slipping into something else, something foreign. It was as though I were standing at the edge of two worlds, both vying for dominance, each one pulling me further from my own reality. The sounds around me intensified. The footsteps had multiplied into a clamor now, an entire crowd moving through the corridor, yet the space remained empty to my eyes. I could hear them whispering, muffled voices passing like shadows, slipping through the cracks of the air. I thought I heard names, fragments of conversations, disjointed and overlapping. My own name was among the whispers. David Chen. I froze, my hand still gripping the phone, which now showed static. I raised my eyes to the progress bar, which had reached 91%. It was nearing the completion of whatever process I was being subjected to. The more I looked at it, the more I understood. I wasn't just cataloging the base, I was becoming part of it, integrated into it, erased and replaced. A sudden shift in the air, a quick drop in temperature, signaled something had changed. The hallway expanded again, stretching into endless blackness that swallowed any sense of direction. The floor beneath me pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, the concrete underfoot softening as if it were no longer solid. I stumbled backward, my feet no longer landing on the firm ground I knew, but sinking slightly, as though the structure of this place was no longer anchored in reality. I looked up at the progress bar again, its green glow now flickering rapidly, pulse-like. Artificial memory. What memories had they integrated into me? What was real anymore? My pulse quickened as I realized I no longer recognized the hallway. Was it even the same corridor I had entered earlier? The signs, plain and institutional, had shifted too, the words on the walls and the ceiling now spelling out coded phrases in languages I couldn't understand, yet the instinct in my chest told me it was for me to read. The progress bar hit 100%. Transfer complete. Welcome to project continuation. My stomach clenched, a feeling of overwhelming wrongness flooding my chest. This wasn't just a historical site. It was something else entirely. A place for, what? For conditioning. Memory manipulation. An experiment in reality itself. I turned and ran, my steps echoing in the empty corridor, though I wasn't sure if I was still running toward escape or deeper into this madness. The footsteps around me began to match my pace, chasing me now, their rhythm synchronized with mine, as if they were not bound by space or time. The whispers behind me grew louder, almost mocking, as if they knew I couldn't outrun what was happening to me, as if there was no place to escape from this transformation. And then I stopped. At the far end of the corridor, a door appeared, one I hadn't seen before, its surface smooth, unmarked by time or dust, as if it had been placed here just for me. A single word had materialized above it, glowing in bright, unnatural blue. Exit. I reached for the handle, but the moment my hand touched the cold metal, the floor beneath me seemed to give way, and the walls closed in with a terrible, grinding noise. The light in the corridor flickered and hummed, like a dying fluorescent bulb on its last breath. My body felt too heavy, as though the very air was thickening around me. The door was no longer an exit. It was just a boundary, another part of this system that was trying to contain me. I heard it again, my name. David Chen. But this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a command. I turned, and a figure appeared in the shadowed corridor ahead of me. It was a man, tall and thin, his face obscured in darkness, standing still as if waiting for me. The figure didn't move. Welcome to the continuation, it said, its voice a soft, mechanical hum, vibrating through the air like a long-forgotten frequency. I wanted to scream, to turn and run, but my legs were heavy, locked in place by some invisible force. My throat was dry, constricted, unable to produce a sound. I could feel the pull again. This was no longer a place for the curious or the forgotten. It was a place for those who were being erased, rewritten into something new, something they had no control over. A place where the thin line between memory and reality had been obliterated. You're part of the experiment now, David, the figure said, its voice cold, almost pitying. No one leaves here. Not really. And in that moment, I understood. I wasn't just documenting Fort Meridian. I had become a part of it, woven into its very fabric, a part of its dark history, its lost project, its invisible scars. Whatever had happened here had bled into me, and there was no way to separate what had been done to me from who I had been. This place, this structure, had altered me in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. I wasn't David Chen anymore. I was a product of whatever this place had become. The figure stepped closer, and the air grew impossibly cold. It was no longer a figure, it was a shadow, and it was pulling me into the void of its depths. I thought of the ice machine, the strange snowflakes, the words on the floor, messages meant for me, meant for everyone who had been a part of this place. I thought about the forgotten project that had never been documented, the missing pages, the anomalies in the personnel records. I thought about how none of it had ever been real, how it had all been part of something far larger, far more sinister. But now, it didn't matter. I had crossed the line. And there was no going back.